Millionaire spent a fortune to save his twin daughters until the nanny discovered what no doctor saw. The plane had just slipped through the last layer of clouds before landing in Seattle when Alexander Reed's phone vibrated. He thought it was a late email from the Tokyo Tech Conference, but when he saw the number calling from the hospital, his heart skipped a beat. He answered, and within 3 seconds, Alexander's world split into two halves, the half where Laura existed and the half where she didn't. A trembling nurse's voice came through the line. "We're so sorry. Aneurysm. No time." The words felt warped, swallowed by the airport noise. Alexander stood frozen in the middle of the rushing crowd, as if the air itself had been sucked out of his chest. Laura, the woman whose smile made every day worth living, was gone in a matter of minutes, without warning, without a goodbye. Alexander didn't remember how he found a cab, didn't remember what he said to his assistant. He only remembered sitting in the back seat, hands shaking violently, whispering like a man who had just lost his anchor. "This can't be real. Laura, this can't be real." But his pain was nothing compared to what waited for him at home. The Reed mansion had always been filled with laughter, the patter of tiny feet on hardwood floors, the sound of two little voices fighting over school stories, the gentle hum of Laura singing while cooking dinner. But when Alexander opened the door, the only thing that hit him was silence, the kind of silence that doesn't belong to peace, but to grief. He stepped deeper into the house, his heart heavy as stone. No Lily running to cling to his leg. No Grace climbing into his arms, begging to tell him something. He called out louder, "Lily? Grace? Daddy's home." No answer, only the cold echo of his voice dissolving into the emptiness. Alexander found the twins in their bedroom, sitting close together on the pink carpet. They held each other so tightly, their small arms trembled. Lily's eyes were wide open, staring into nothing as if she were looking through the world itself. Grace was the same, an empty, hollow gaze, stripped of all the childhood light that once danced in it. He knelt down, voice cracking. "Sweethearts, Daddy's here. Come to Daddy." But neither of them moved. They didn't look at him. They didn't speak. They didn't cry. The way Lily rested her head on Grace's shoulder felt like the only way they knew to keep from falling apart. Alexander touched their backs gently, but they didn't react, as if sound, touch, and the entire world had been switched off inside them. His heart shattered in that silence. That night, he didn't leave the room. The girls curled up like two tiny birds battered by a storm, and Alexander sat beside them, watching every fragile breath. He whispered, barely holding himself together, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I promise." But the world behind those small, vacant eyes had collapsed the moment Laura left. And in that moment, Alexander understood. He wasn't just facing the grief of losing his wife. He was facing a terrifying silence that marked the beginning of the most desperate journey of his life. The journey to reclaim the voices and spirits of his daughters before they disappeared into the darkness forever. In the days following Laura's funeral, the house felt as if it had been covered by a thick fog of grief. Lily and Grace still didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't react to any sound or touch. Alexander felt as though he was living in a world where time had stopped, only two children trapped in silence, and a father powerless to reach them. He immediately sought out the best specialists around the country. Seattle, then San Francisco, then New York. But whenever he mentioned the case, everyone seemed to say the same thing. If anyone can help, it's Dr. Evelyn Hart. Evelyn was one of the most renowned pediatric neurologists in Boston, and she had known the Reed family years ago. When she received Alexander's request, she flew to Seattle at once. Her presence alone carried a kind of authority Alexander clung to like the last piece of driftwood in a storm. Evelyn had the demeanor of someone accustomed to the most complex cases. She didn't promise anything, didn't console. She simply observed, taking notes on every detail, every tiny reaction from the girls. For 2 straight days, she ordered brain scans, neural activity tests, reflex assessments, psychological evaluations, trauma analyses, every tool modern medicine could offer. Alexander stayed close through every step, holding on to even the faintest hope as though it were air itself. But on the 3rd day, when Evelyn stepped out of the results room, her eyes carried a weight he wasn't ready to face. She sat down across from him, removed her glasses, and exhaled, as if preparing to deliver news she wished she didn't have to. "Alexander." Her voice was calm but completely devoid of light. "I'm very sorry." His heart tightened. Lily and Grace aren't suffering from ordinary trauma. They have entered a state of permanent mutism, a severe neurological shutdown. Their brains have essentially closed the doors to survive the shock. She paused, then delivered the words like nails being hammered into a coffin. "They will never speak again." Alexander felt the ground disappear from under him. No, that can't be. "Evelyn, there has to be something else, right? Some treatment, some kind of therapy. Please, anything." Evelyn looked at him with an expression half sympathetic, half cold, the look of someone who had stood before countless desperate families. "I understand how much this hurts, but science is science. The best you can do now is help them adapt." Then, with clinical precision, she opened her briefcase. "However, there are still support programs, intensive therapy, neural stimulation technologies, experimental treatments. They are expensive, but they may offer some improvement." Alexander nodded, grasping at everything she said like a man drowning, clinging to anything that resembled hope. He didn't know that this was only the beginning of a long road built on deception. The final words Evelyn Hart left behind that day were not merely a diagnosis. They were a cold blade slicing into wounds that had never been given time to heal. For days, the sentence repeated in Alexander's mind like a verdict carved into stone. The girls will never speak again. And during the 6 months that followed, he lived inside that verdict, hour by hour, minute by minute, breath by breath. Time dragged itself forward through heavy mornings and endless, sleepless nights. He tried to work, tried to keep his company from collapsing, but every time he looked at his computer screen, the faces of Lily and Grace appeared like a shadow he couldn't escape. Each evening, he returned to a house that felt emptier than the night before, then sat for hours beside the twins' bed, watching them sleep curled tightly together like fragile pieces of glass that could shatter under the slightest breeze. "Tomorrow, maybe tomorrow one of you will talk to me," he whispered every night, even though he knew he was clinging to a hope that barely existed. But tomorrow always looked exactly like yesterday. Lily and Grace stayed locked inside their tiny, silent world. No words, no laughter, not even a glance in his direction. There were nights when Alexander stood in the doorway, watching the girls hold each other under their thin blanket, and he felt a crushing weight on his chest. If Laura were still here, she would know what to do. "I'm just a father stumbling in the dark." The house grew more chaotic with every passing month. Therapy devices cluttered every corner, sessions stretched endlessly. Specialists arrived with confidence and left quietly with frustration. Expensive neural stimulation equipment was installed and removed, replaced, and abandoned. The mansion felt less like a home and more like a laboratory of hopeless attempts. The only sign of life came from the faint, shallow breaths of Lily and Grace as they slept in their world of silence. Eventually, the household manager approached Alexander one exhausted afternoon. "Mr. Reed, we need additional help. Everyone is overwhelmed. We simply can't keep up." Alexander nodded without thinking. He no longer had the energy to question anything. If someone could help restore even a tiny piece of order in the chaos he had created, he would accept it without hesitation. And that was when Maya Collins appeared, so quietly that no one could have guessed she would change everything. At 32, Maya was small-framed, gentle-faced, with a softness in her voice that made each word sound carefully measured. She arrived at the Reed mansion with a worn backpack, shoes with thinning soles, and eyes carrying the weight of memories she would rather forget. Her resume listed only a few housekeeping jobs and nothing more. No one asked questions, and Alexander had no strength to care. But beneath those sparse lines lay a history Maya herself wished she could erase. She had once been a promising pediatric nurse at Chicago Children's Hospital, a young woman who always knelt to talk to her patients at eye level, who smiled tenderly while changing bandages for tiny hands and feet. Until one tragic case changed everything. A child died from severe complications, and although Maya fought for hours to save them, the hospital needed someone to bear responsibility. And the person who signed the damning report that destroyed her career was none other than Dr. Evelyn Hart, then the head of the treatment team, with enough power to decide anyone's fate. A few harsh, ambiguous lines in the report erased Maya's future. License revoked, career ended, reputation ruined. Now she lived quietly, taking housekeeping jobs to survive, completely unaware that Evelyn was the one treating Alexander's daughters. On her first day at the Reed mansion, Maya felt the heaviness in the air the moment she stepped inside. Every step she took felt as though she was navigating through invisible shards of grief. She forced herself to focus on the tasks she had been hired for, cleaning, tidying, bringing some order to the physical mess that had accumulated through months of emotional collapse. But as she passed through the living room, she saw Lily and Grace. The twins sat on the large sofa, their eyes empty, staring through her as though she didn't exist. The way their bodies pressed tightly together made Maya's chest tighten. She had seen that posture countless times in severely traumatized children, those who chose silence as their only refuge. Maya stopped, her hand trembling slightly around the cleaning cloth, and whispered to no one but herself, "You poor little ones, how much have you endured?" She didn't know that in the moment she looked into their hollow eyes, the fate of everyone in that house had already begun to shift. That afternoon, the Reed house was wrapped in the dim winter light of Seattle, cold and still in a way that made even the smallest sound feel capable of tipping the entire atmosphere. Maya was bent over, picking up scattered toys on the floor, her hands moving out of habit while her mind drifted somewhere far away. Without realizing it, a familiar melody slipped from her lips, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing when she was little, soft as an old wool scarf and warm as arms long gone. The sound spread through the room, faint yet strong enough to stir something sealed tight within the house. Lily and Grace, curled up at the end of the sofa, suddenly froze. They lifted their heads at the same moment, their dull eyes trembling ever so slightly, like a lake surface touched by a passing breeze. Maya startled when she met their gaze, her hands pausing midair, her voice fading. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you," she whispered, but the girls kept staring at her, as if that melody had reached a place no one had touched for half a year. Alexander happened to walk through the hallway just then. He meant to continue on, but stopped in his tracks when he saw his daughters looking at Maya, not empty, not drifting, but responding. A real reaction. The first in 6 months. His chest tightened with a burst of hope so sudden that he had to grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. In the days that followed, that small glimmer didn't fade the way Alexander feared. Instead, it grew a little stronger each time Maya appeared. The girls quietly followed her around the house, as if afraid she would disappear if they looked away. Maya cleaned while telling a small story she remembered, or hummed short, meaningless tunes, sometimes even holding playful conversations with herself. And Alexander, watching from a distance, noticed the corner of Lily's mouth twitch, and the way Grace tilted her head as though she were listening. Tiny changes, so subtle they could easily be overlooked. but to him they were nothing short of miraculous. "If it stays like this, it's enough," he murmured inwardly, feeling a warmth in his chest he had long forgotten. Even if it was only a fragile sliver of light, it was enough to tear open the darkness that had smothered his life and the lives of his daughters. The tiny changes surrounding Maya continued to grow day by day, but Alexander still never dared to believe that a true miracle could happen. He simply watched in silence, clinging to his fragile hope like someone afraid that even breathing too hard would cause the light to disappear. And then, on a quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the line of trees and the house settled into a warm, golden haze, something unimaginable unfolded. Alexander was heading toward his office when a strange sound drifted from the end of the hallway. He froze. It wasn't footsteps, nor the clatter of something falling. It was laughter. A faint trembling sound, fragile as a leaf brushing against the wind, yet powerful enough to make his heart pound violently in his chest. He moved toward the girl's room, each step soft and cautious, as if he might shatter the moment just by approaching too quickly. When he reached the door, he placed his hand on the knob, held his breath for a second, and gently pushed it open. The scene before him rooted him to the floor. Maya was lying on a blanket spread across the floor, one hand on her forehead, her eyes half closed as she pretended to be sick. Lily and Grace stood beside her, dressed in white toy doctor coats, plastic stethoscopes hanging around their little necks, their faces serious in the most adorable way. Two tiny doctors tending to their patient. Maya tried to hold back her laughter so as not to break the game. "Oh, doctors, I feel so sick," she whispered dramatically. And then, like the entire world paused, waiting for this single instant, Grace leaned forward, held out a small toy medicine bottle, and whispered in her soft cotton candy voice, "Mommy, here's your medicine." Maya's eyes flew open in shock, and Alexander felt the floor vanish beneath him. Lily spoke immediately after, her voice small but clear, as if a door locked for half a year had suddenly swung wide open. "You have to take it so you can get better." Alexander collapsed to his knees, his hand covering his mouth to keep the sob from bursting out. Tears streamed down his face, hot, uncontrollable, carrying 6 months of fear, grief, and desperate hope all at once. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only stare at his daughters, his precious girls whom he thought had been sealed away forever, now talking, playing, living. Maya noticed him and sat up abruptly, panic spreading across her face. "Mr. Reed, I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" Alexander shook his head over and over, tears still falling. "No, Maya, don't apologize." His voice broke. "You didn't do anything wrong. You just brought my children back to me." And in that moment, he knew the miracle he had been waiting for during 6 endless months had finally arrived. From the moment that miraculous afternoon unfolded, Alexander lived in a haze of disbelief and happiness so fragile he feared it might vanish at any second. Every morning he rushed to the girls' room to make sure those little voices hadn't been a dream born from desperation. And each time Maya greeted them and the twins offered faint, brightening smiles in return, he felt his heart steadier, surer. The miracle was real, undeniable. And in that swell of gratitude, he did what any joyful father would do. He called the person he believed had been walking beside him through all the suffering, Dr. Evelyn Hart. But he never expected her reaction to be so cold. When he told her the girls had spoken again, Evelyn didn't celebrate, didn't sound relieved. Instead, there was a strange, heavy pause. Then her voice came through the phone, slow and laced with suspicion. "Alexander, are you sure that's a positive reaction?" He froze. "What do you mean? They talked, Evelyn?" "That's exactly why I'm worried," she replied. "The girls calling the housemaid "Mommy," is extremely dangerous. It's a sign of a distorted attachment, potentially leading to severe psychological issues. Her words poured over his newfound happiness like ice water. And before he could object, Evelyn continued, "Alexander, I'm afraid that woman is not trustworthy. Do you even know anything about her past?" He hesitated. He hadn't thought about it. For 6 months, his world had revolved entirely around the twins, leaving no space for anything or anyone else. Sensing his silence, Evelyn pressed harder. "I will look into her background, just to be safe." And like a storm arriving exactly when predicted, she called back the next day. Her voice carried dramatic weight, as if she were revealing the crimes of a dangerous fugitive. She recounted Maya's past, the incident in Chicago, the child's death, the damning report, the revoked license. Every detail that could make Maya sound threatening, Evelyn emphasized, distorted, magnified. "You understand, right? Someone like that cannot be near your daughters." Alexander sat in stunned silence. The entire day blurred, his thoughts pulled sharply between two opposing forces: the trust he had started to place in Maya and the fear Evelyn's prestige stirred in him. That evening he called Maya into his office. His voice was heavy, as if dragged down by chains. "Maya, is what Evelyn said true?" Maya's fingers tightened together, her eyes glistening but unflinching. "Yes, I was a nurse, but I was innocent, Mr. Reed. I did everything to save that child. But you didn't tell me," Alexander snapped, pain twisting through his words. "You hid it from me." "Because if I told you, no one would hire me," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "I wasn't trying to deceive you. I just needed a chance to work." The silence that followed was thick enough to suffocate. Then Alexander spoke the sentence he didn't fully believe, even as it left his mouth. "You should leave." Maya bowed her head, tears spilling onto the floor, but she didn't beg, didn't offer excuses. She simply turned away, her small shoulders trembling with each step. On the staircase, Lily and Grace had been standing there for who knows how long. They looked at Maya with panic, then turned to Alexander with pleading eyes, searching for an explanation he couldn't give. Before he could say a word, the girls broke into tears, those silent, soundless tears that had once terrified him, tears that carried only raw despair. And by the next morning, when Alexander called their names, Lily and Grace had fallen back into absolute silence. After Maya left the Reed mansion, the silence returned, but this time it wasn't the silence of trauma. It was a suffocating silence, torn apart and stitched back together in the ugliest way, leaving a wound deeper than before. Lily and Grace didn't scream, didn't call for Maya. They simply stood close together, their vacant eyes fixed on the cold, empty yard outside, as if the world had gone dark all over again. Alexander watched his daughters with a guilt so crushing he felt his chest tighten until he could barely breathe. For the first time in 6 months, he knew he had done something unforgivably wrong. In the days that followed, Alexander tried to reorganize the girls' old therapy schedule, hoping there might still be a way to help them after losing Maya. He rummaged through the mountain of medical files in his office, documents that Evelyn's assistants had been sending regularly after each evaluation, but that he had never been clear-headed enough to open. Amid the chaos, one thick folder clipped with a red binder caught his eye. It didn't look like the rest. No Evelyn's signature, no familiar handwriting, only a faded label reading, "Behavioral Evaluation, Chicago." He frowned. Why would there be a file from Chicago? Evelyn had never once mentioned any specialist from there. When he opened the folder, his hands froze. On the first page was the logo of the Chicago Children's Behavioral Center, along with the name Dr. Noah Ramirez. Ramirez? Who is that? He flipped the page. The very first line of the conclusion sent a chill through him. Diagnosis: temporary selective mutism due to trauma. Prognosis: full recovery expected. Recommendation: avoid invasive treatments, increase calm environments, music exposure, and emotional bonding with a stable caregiver. There was no mention of permanent mutism, no dire warnings like the ones Evelyn had repeated for months. Alexander reread the report over and over, his heartbeat pounding violently. Why was this report in his house? Who sent it? And why had Evelyn never mentioned it? He flipped to the last page. A small line, nearly hidden along a fold, read, "Report sent directly per request of Dr. Evelyn Hart, to be forwarded to the Reed family." Alexander felt a blast of cold run through his entire body. Without hesitation, he dialed the number listed next to Dr. Ramirez's signature. After 4 rings, a deep, calm male voice answered. "This is Dr. Ramirez." Alexander gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Doctor, why did I never receive your report? Who did you send it to?" There was a short pause. Then Ramirez replied, steady and certain. "I sent it to Dr. Evelyn Hart, exactly as she instructed. She said she would pass it along to you." In that moment, Alexander felt the entire world tilt. His vision dimmed, and all the loose fragments of the past 6 months snapped together in a pattern so brutally clear it made his stomach twist. Evelyn had intentionally hidden the truth. And Alexander knew from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. After the truth came to light, Alexander no longer had the strength to face anyone, least of all Evelyn. He didn't call, didn't confront her, didn't demand an explanation. The only thing he did was pack his daughter's belongings, buckle them into the car, and quietly leave Seattle on a cold gray morning that matched the weight in his chest. He drove straight to Chicago, the place where the one person he had wronged most deeply was still living. For hours on the road, Lily and Grace sat silently in the back seat like 2 small shadows. But sometimes Alexander caught their eyes in the rearview mirror, eyes that no longer looked angry at him, only terrified of being abandoned again. The sight made his heart twist painfully. When they finally reached Chicago, Alexander parked in front of the old apartment building where Maya lived. He stood at her door for a long moment, taking several deep breaths, like a man about to walk into an operating room. And when the door opened and Maya appeared, he understood instantly just how much he had lost. Maya froze, unable to hide her shock. "Mr. Reed, why—" Alexander didn't let her finish. His voice cracked. "Maya, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I trusted the wrong person. Please, help Lily and Grace. Please come with us." Maya gripped the sleeve of her sweater, tears filling her eyes, not from hurt this time, but because of the 2 small faces peeking from behind Alexander, their pleading eyes saying, "Don't leave us again." She nodded gently. At Dr. Noah Ramirez's clinic, Lily and Grace seemed like completely different children. The moment Maya sat down, they rushed toward her, leaning into her as if she were the only safe place left in the world. Ramirez observed quietly, then smiled with a knowing softness. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice steady and warm, "your daughters never needed medication or invasive treatments. They needed someone they felt safe with, someone who was truly present, and that person is Maya." Those words hit Alexander straight in the heart. He lifted a trembling hand to his face, trying to steady himself, but he couldn't. The tears fell, not from weakness, but because he had finally, painfully, seen the biggest mistake of his life. The fragile peace Alexander had just regained lasted only 3 days. On the 4th morning, while he was gathering documents to file charges against Evelyn for concealing the medical report, his phone erupted with non-stop notifications. News alerts flashed across the screen like a hailstorm. The headline that hit him hardest read, "License revoked nurse secretly infiltrates Millionaire Reed's mansion." Alexander froze. He opened article after article, each page filled with photos of Maya entering and leaving the Reed home. moments twisted out of context, maliciously cropped, paired with venomous captions and hateful comments. Within hours, the story spread across news sites, social media, and forums. It moved like a plague, faster than any explanation he could give. In the articles, Evelyn was quoted as a trusted source, claiming Maya had a concealed history of severe medical misconduct and that she had intervened only to protect the children. Alexander clenched his phone so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. He knew exactly who was behind all of it. Evelyn hadn't only hidden the truth, she had launched a calculated attack, this one her final strike before he could expose her deception. And the storm escalated quickly. The public frenzy pushed Child Protective Services to act almost immediately. They arrived at Dr. Ramirez's clinic and delivered their decision without hesitation. Maya Collins is temporarily prohibited from contacting Lily and Grace until the investigation is complete. Maya stood frozen. Lily and Grace, upon hearing the words, panicked so violently that their knees buckled. They rushed to Maya, clinging to her sleeves as though holding on to the last breath of their world. "Don't go." The broken, trembling whispers were so faint they pierced Alexander's heart like knives. But the agent still pulled Maya away, and Lily and Grace were left in Alexander's arms, crying in silence, those soundless cries identical to the ones from 6 months earlier, only now filled with a deeper, more devastating despair. Within just 1 day without Maya, the twins fell back into the abyss of mutism. They stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped looking at anyone. They simply sat by the door, waiting for Maya to return, as if the entire world depended on it. Alexander watched them from across the room and knew there was no turning back. Evelyn had chosen her final attack, and he, now more than ever as a father, would answer with everything he had. Not only to protect Maya, but to shatter every strand of deceit Evelyn had built. After the day Evelyn launched her final blow, Alexander felt as though the world was tightening around his throat. Lily and Grace withered a little more each hour from losing Maya for the second time, and he himself seemed to be sinking into a thick, suffocating darkness where helplessness gnawed at every part of him. But at the very edge of his despair, a voice rose from somewhere deep inside him, cold, sharp, and unshakably resolute. "If I can't protect the people I love, then I don't deserve to be their father." From that moment forward, Alexander was no longer a broken man. He was a storm gathering in silence. He began calling, emailing, pulling awake every powerful connection he had made across the worlds of technology and finance. Within 48 hours, he assembled a team that would terrify any corporation. Investigators who specialized in dismantling medical corruption, forensic financial experts who could trace every stolen dollar, and a legion of seasoned attorneys known for bringing down the biggest hospital fraud schemes in the country. When they gathered inside his office, Alexander said only one sentence: "Bring me the truth, and don't spare anyone." The investigation began like a drill plunging straight into darkness. Night after night, the blue light of laptop screens washed over Alexander's face, while the only sound in the mansion was the relentless tapping of keys. Secrets buried for years began peeling away, layer by layer. Evelyn had not merely made mistakes. She was the architect of an intricate network of deceit. Falsified patient files, altered test results, manipulated accounting to siphon research funds, fabricated reports to hide the deadly error of a powerful colleague, and worst of all, the forged document that had destroyed Maya's career. "I can't believe this," one investigator muttered as he compared the genuine and fake reports side by side. She wasn't just blamed, she was sacrificed. Alexander stood silent, one hand tightened into a fist until his knuckles turned white. "I trusted someone like that," he whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of grief and fury. "I let her steal my daughter's voices, and Maya's entire life." When the full evidence package was submitted to federal authorities, the media exploded as though someone had ignited a barrel of gunpowder. News of Evelyn's medical fraud spread across the United States, dominating national broadcasts for weeks. Other victims she had silenced over the years stepped into the spotlight. The day Evelyn was handcuffed inside her own office, Alexander watched the live stream without a word. The once arrogant face was now twisted with fear, and for the first time in months, he exhaled like a man lifting a mountain off his chest. The trial stretched for weeks, but ended decisively. Evelyn received a heavy prison sentence for forging medical records, financial fraud, patient manipulation, and abuse of authority. Maya was summoned by the medical board not to be condemned, but to be restored. Her wrongful judgment was overturned, her license reinstated, her name cleared with a formal public apology. When Alexander brought the news home, Lily and Grace looked up at him, their eyes glowing with the warmth of a sunrise returning after a night that felt endless. When everything finally came to an end, Alexander drove Maya back to Seattle on a quiet afternoon, the golden sunlight pouring over the long road as if announcing a new beginning. The moment the mansion door opened, Lily and Grace rushed out like two small gusts of wind. They threw themselves into Maya's arms, their tears and laughter blending into the most beautiful sound Alexander had heard in his entire life. "Maya, Maya, don't go again. Don't ever go again." Maya held the girls tightly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I promise, I'll stay as long as you need me." In that moment, Alexander watched them with a heart that, for the first time in months, felt whole again. The house, once swallowed in darkness, now glowed with a light that came not from lamps or the sun, but from the life Maya had brought back. Evenings were once more filled with soft piano melodies, with Maya's storytelling, with Lily and Grace asking endless questions, and with laughter, the sound he once feared he would never hear again. After Evelyn's case was closed, Alexander founded the Reed Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting traumatized children and fighting medical fraud. His vow that no child would ever endure the cruel silence his daughters once lived through. Time passed in the blink of an eye. Many years later, in the Reed Foundation's auditorium, warm lights shone on two grown young women. Lily, now a pediatric doctor specializing in trauma, stood confidently at the microphone, a sight no one would have dared dream of years ago. Grace stood beside her, already a rising child psychologist, her gentle eyes carrying the calm that had comforted countless wounded hearts. In the front row sat Maya, not a housekeeper anymore, not just the woman who once saved two silent little girls, but the clinical director of the foundation, the person at the heart of its mission. Alexander sat beside her, his hair touched with silver, but his smile carrying the same warmth as the day everything changed. Alexander reached over, placed his hand over hers and whispered, "Thank you for bringing this family back." Maya smiled softly. "We did it together." And in that moment, as Lily and Grace rushed down to embrace them both under the warm golden lights, Alexander knew that every hurt, every battle, every loss had led them here, to a real family, whole and hopeful.